Hello, I'm Pat Boone. For over 2,000 years, the story of Jesus Christ has inspired great artists and musicians to create the world's masterpieces. It's invited scholars and rulers to debate its authenticity and effect on world politics. And sadly, it's also instigated bloody wars that continue even to this day. But who was this Jesus of Nazareth? Did he really exist? Was he truly immaculately conceived and miraculously born in a stable in Bethlehem? Did he grow up the son of a simple carpenter to become the Messiah? Did the very people he came to save turn on him and punish him for heresy? Was he actually crucified on a cross? And most importantly, did he rise from the dead and appear before his followers before ascending into heaven? The Bible tells us so, but is the Bible literally the Word of God, and can its authenticity be trusted? We're about to find out. The Holy Bible, as we know it today, has stood as a symbol of truth for centuries. Men and women have fought fierce battles to protect it from falling into harm's way. And still others claim the Bible has shielded them from harm. No other published work has sparked so much controversy in the history of the printed word. And incidentally, the Holy Bible was the first book ever printed by Johannes Gutenberg in 1454. It is still the best-selling book of all time, with over 5 billion copies printed in the last 200 years alone. Even with astronomical sales figures and billions of devout followers, the debate over the authenticity of the Holy Bible continues to rage on today. So how can we separate fact from fiction, legacy from legend, and history from hype? Well, we've assembled a panel of scientific experts who've made it their life's work to study and substantiate the claims made in the Bible as the truth, gospel truth. They're a diverse group of acclaimed archaeologists, historians, doctors, and scholars. Let's meet them.
There's a lot of archaeological finds that corroborate the biblical evidence.
The vast majority of archaeological and scientific and historical studies have actually confirmed the Bible.
I find science and faith not in opposition to each other.
There is no scientific or historical evidence that disproves the Bible.
We can, in fact, look in the dirt, look at the stones, look at history, and we're dealing with real things here.
There is enough that has been provided for us in the historical records outside the Bible, and in the archaeological evidence outside the Bible, and in the geographical considerations that you can find over there, that show that the faith has a very firm intellectual basis.
But how can we be certain that the authors of the Bible got it right?
When you look at the gospel authors, for example, the Gospel of Luke, his intent at the very beginning, he states, is that he would provide an exact account of events regarding Jesus' life. So we know that's his purpose. Now from there, what we find as well is that when you look at incidents such as the virgin birth of Jesus, this extremely important event, it's just simply narrated as though it was well-established fact without any kind of embellishment at all.
The story of Jesus Christ begins with his miraculous yet humble birth in a manger in Bethlehem. When Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus ordered a census, Joseph and Mary, the Virgin Mother of Jesus, set out for Bethlehem.
The Roman emperor at the time was Augustus. As a matter of fact, he's the one that Luke first mentions in his Nativity account. And his censuses, by the way, were rather famous. It was that middle census of 8 BC, which started a chain of events that brought the Holy Family down to Bethlehem.
The census demanded that all citizens return to their place of birth. Bethlehem was the home of Joseph, so he and Mary began their journey. In those days, the trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem could take well over a week when traveling by foot or mule, and was made even more hazardous by Mary's late pregnancy. When they reached Bethlehem, the time came for Mary to deliver her child. Joseph searched for a room in an inn, but there was none to be found.
According to one of the earliest church fathers, he knew Bethlehem and knew the account, and so he said that Jesus was born in a grotto or a cave or a cavern that was used as a stable. And so it was in one of these grottos that Jesus was born.
Was it by chance that there were no rooms, or just bad luck? Or could it have been preordained?
What's interesting about the birth of Jesus is that even the location was predicted in the book of Micah ahead of time as to where Jesus would be born.
And on that night in Bethlehem, Jesus was born.
This was more than just an ordinary human baby. This was a baby that had a human mother, but God himself was the father. According to Luke's gospel, when the shepherds announced the good news about the birth of a Messiah in Bethlehem, the heavens opened up and there was a heavenly choir which said, "Glory to God in the highest, goodwill toward men."
Even as the miracle of the virgin birth took place in Bethlehem, there was another piece of this miraculous story unfolding in the east. 3 magi, or wise men, had already seen the sign in the night sky, a bright star, and they took this as a sign that a great king would be born in Judea. The Magi followed the star to Jerusalem, where they hoped to find the newborn king.
The Magi are really very well known as a fraternity, as a caste of very wise men. They were the medical experts, the lawyers, they were religious historians, they were astronomers, astrologers, they were walking universities. And they're very well known both in Babylonia and Persia.
The book of Matthew tells us that the Magi, or 3 wise men, brought gifts to the baby Jesus.
3 gifts are mentioned: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold, a royal symbol, and also very handy to have as traveler's checks later on when they make that flight to Egypt. Frankincense, to indicate the priestly function of Jesus in the future. And myrrh, that's an interesting salve used medicinally, and it was also used to embalm bodies after death. So in a sense, you have these very prophetic gifts that were given Jesus right at his birth.
But what phenomenon could be so great to cause these 3 wise men to travel so far from home?
The visit of the Magi, of course, took place because of the Star of Bethlehem, this fascinating phenomenon which illuminates the Nativity account.
What was this star that shone so bright? And was it a star at all? We went to the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles to find out.
Most astronomers believe we should look at what the planets were doing if we want to know what the star was. And that's because the Magi were astrologers. You'll often hear that the star led them to Jerusalem and then on to Bethlehem. But I don't believe that's the case. The star marked the fulfillment of the prophecies. When the Magi saw the star, whatever it was, that told them that these prophecies had been fulfilled. They had to interpret this celestial sign. But the star didn't lead them anywhere. It didn't guide them anywhere. They saw the star and they said, aha, it's time to act. And so the question is, what in the sky would be sufficiently unusual that it would get the Magi excited and send them on their way?
Scientists have long speculated on just what caused the appearance of a bright, moving star. Perhaps it was a supernova or a comet. Ancient records kept by Chinese astronomers show no record of an exploding star at the time of Jesus' birth, and the Magi would have taken a comet as a sign of some impending disaster, not the birth of a Savior. So, astronomers are left with only one conclusion.
To identify the star that the Magi saw, we have to look at the sky as the Magi would have seen it. So if you'll tell me when Jesus was born, I can crank up the desktop computer and see what the sky was like. If you were standing in Persia looking at the Star of Bethlehem, what you probably would have seen is a conjunction of planets. That's one planet passing another, two planets very close together.
This is probably what the Magi saw. Two planets that looked like a single bright star moving across the night sky. History tells us that the three Magi were astrologers. We can only imagine their reaction to such a celestial spectacle.
Now, I don't believe in astrology, but the Magi did. And according to the astrology of the ancient Near East, Jupiter, being the bright and largest planet, was called the King's Planet. And the ringed planet Saturn was called the shield or defender of Palestine. And so now you translate. Jupiter almost hits Saturn. A king is coming to Palestine.
The science of astrology hasn't changed much since ancient times, so it would be interesting to hear what a modern-day astrologer has to say about the Star of Bethlehem.
If the Magi were in Persia looking up at the night sky, they might have seen this brilliance of the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter, which would have produced a very bright light, and it would have captured their attention, of course. Each planet has a description. Jupiter is the planet that describes religion or philosophy or humor or this curiosity about the workings of the universe, the awe at the workings of the universe. And Venus, in my mind, in its highest connotation, describes social justice.
But was it a conjunction of planets?
A conjunction in astrology is exactly the same thing as a conjunction in astronomy. It's just that we ascribe a meaning to that conjunction. And the meaning of the conjunction of Jupiter and Venus is great good fortune. Harmony, beauty, pleasure, love, everything that could be wonderfully, positive in one's life.
The Magi weren't the only ones to notice the Star of Bethlehem. It also caught the attention of King Herod the Great of Judea.
The whole portrait that we get of Herod from the pages of Josephus, first century Jewish historian, almost an eyewitness, compares exactly with the portrait we get of Herod in Matthew's Gospel.
People often confuse this Herod with the Herod mentioned during Jesus' trials. They're not the same person. Herod the Great was the ruthless king of Judea. The later Herod, one of his many sons.
We have several inscriptions that mention Herod that have been found in various places. There are many little coins that have written around them, just as we write an inscription around our coins today, Herod the King. And so he is a very vivid person in history, very well known.
Once the Magi told Herod about the newborn king of the Jews, he felt threatened, and he sent them to search for the new Messiah in Bethlehem and report back to him so that he might kill the baby boy before he could fulfill his destiny. But the Magi were warned of Herod's evil plan in a vision, and they returned to Persia, bypassing Judea and Herod. When the Magi failed to return, Herod proclaimed an edict that all boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem should be rounded up and slaughtered. Historical records of the time make no mention of this horrible event, leading some modern scholars to wonder if it ever happened at all.
One aspect of the Nativity that comes under a heavy critical attack is that Herod couldn't possibly have killed those babies in Bethlehem.
Even though historians concur that Herod was a wretched tyrant in his later years, some skeptics say that if hundreds of Jewish babies were murdered in cold blood, there would be a record of it.
I think the reason so many people doubt this episode is because they think too many babies were killed. You know, some say hundreds of Jewish boy babies killed. It's a scandal that Josephus should have reported. But that's wrong. Bethlehem is only 1,500 people, maybe 2,000. Do an actuarial study of a town that size, you wouldn't have more than 20 babies, 2 years old and under. Half of them the wrong sex. So we're talking about only 10 to 12 babies.
Also, King Herod the Great has been called one of the most ruthless rulers of biblical times. In addition to murdering several of his own family members, his grisly dying wish lets you know just what kind of monster he was.
Herod was worried that nobody would mourn his own passing.
He was right. In fact, his weary subjects were planning a great celebration.
Nobody likes to die under those circumstances, and so he was going to give them something to cry about.
He instructed his sister Salome to arrest all of the Jewish leaders in Palestine and hold them in the hippodrome outside his winter palace, where he was dying.
And the moment his death was announced, they were to be murdered in cold blood. Why? So that thousands of households would be crying at the moment Herod died. Now, is that the sort of sweet fellow who could have killed 10 babies in Bethlehem? I do think so.
While the murder of 10 innocent babies in Jerusalem might not have made the papers in Rome, it is well documented in the Bible. This isn't the only element of the Nativity story that has been questioned by critics. Until very recently, the three Magi, Gaspar, Balthazar, and Melchior, were thought to be a fable. Some scholars believe that their names and kingdoms were nothing more than fictional embellishments added to the Gospels many years later. But then, in 1937, a discovery was made that changed everything. When archaeologists began to search around the area of Questar by the Iran-Afghanistan border, their digging revealed some intriguing clues that the kingdom of at least one of the Magi, King Gaspar, had actually existed. The discovery of a large cache of ancient coins was remarkable, but their real value lay in an inscription on the backside.
It was made in Harwadia, in the kingdom of His Highness King Gaspar.
From the three Magi?
Yes, one of the three wise men.
It was a stunning revelation. The discovery of the coins from Gaspar's kingdom was the first hard evidence that these legendary kings actually existed. But the discovery of the coins was not the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning of a quest to discover the actual lost kingdom of Gaspar. When an American archaeologist working in Cairo heard rumors about the discovery of the coins, he decided to pursue the mystery further. The archaeologist's search paid off. He found the coin, and now he had the keys he needed to begin his search. The archaeologist assembled a team and headed to a site at Questar near the Iran-Afghanistan border in search of the ruins of the lost castle of the man on the coin, King Gaspar.
Day 15. We're still digging, but without any major find to report.
After weeks of digging without success, it looked as if the stories of a lost castle might be a fable after all. With time running out, the entire expedition was becoming a futile effort.
Hassan, Amar, come here. Professor! 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 Professor!
The The professor rushed up the hill as the workers began to uncover the edge of something big.
It's part of a building. It's a foundation. Find the edge, clear away this dirt.
They had found the foundations of Gaspar's castle.
We found it, Professor, we found it!
If the coins had not already shown that the Magi were real, now there was concrete proof. But in spite of this proof, there are still those who don't believe the story of the three Magi. In fact, there was so much argument over the details of Jesus' birth that his actual birthplace remained unmarked for over 300 years. In 330, Queen Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, ordered the first church of the Nativity to be built on the reported site of Jesus' birth. In the Church of the Nativity, hundreds of thousands of people visit the birthplace of Jesus. Their pilgrimage is a testament to the enduring and miraculous power of the first Christmas. As they walk through the narrow passageways and visit the altar there, they relive the glorious spirit in the moment of Jesus' birth, a birth which would initiate a series of events that would change the world forever. In the 4th century, pagan Rome was in turmoil, and Christianity was spreading like wildfire. Emperor Constantine, a recent convert to Christianity himself, felt he had to do something to establish order in his empire. In 313, he tried to make Christianity less divisive by convening the Council of Nicaea. One result of that council was the drafting of what we now call the Nicene Creed, where the basic beliefs of Christianity were outlined and agreed upon. This set off the process of canonization of the Bible. A soldier and a statesman who was obsessed with order and agreement, Constantine was the driving force behind choosing which books would make up the Holy Bible. He ordered that each book be held to an unwavering standard by rigorously testing their divine inspiration and authority. So, in 367 AD, the 27 books of the New Testament, including the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were agreed upon and have remained unchanged to this day. These Gospels describe in great detail Jesus' life and teachings. But how reliable are they as actual biographies of Christ?
The 4 Gospels are tremendously reliable historical biographies of Jesus.
The 4 Gospels, when we compare them especially to other forms of literature in the ancient world, are quite accurate.
I believe the 4 Gospels are very reliable as eyewitness accounts. They confirm one another, as do other documents in church history.
I find the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, to be extremely reliable, for they were written by direct or indirect eyewitnesses.
For example, there are small details that have nothing to do with the stories that archaeologists have discovered were 100% accurate. That's not the kind of detail you find in fiction or things that are mythology.
As eyewitness accounts, the 4 Gospels were written by close associates of Jesus, who were committed to accurately recording his life and his teachings.
They know the names of the people, they know the names of the places, they know if you go up somewhere or if you go down to get there, which direction you're going, all those kinds of details.
Furthermore, the Gospels were written at a time when there were hostile and friendly eyewitnesses around who knew what was happening. They were not written a generation later. They were written very early to the events that they record.
Since each of the 4 Gospels are personal accounts written by 4 different people, there are subtle differences between them. Critics have used these differences to claim that the Gospels are forgeries.
The great thing about the Gospels is that if they were intended to be forgeries, you would expect to have almost word for word similarity between all 4 of them. I believe that there was a divine authorship behind each of these Gospels, but there's also a very human element in each of them, that they're writing from their own perspective.
You know, if you had the 4 greatest portrait artists in the world to paint the same person, you wouldn't expect 4 portraits that look just alike. They would be different from each other because each would have a different impact.
I like to think of the 4 Gospels as 4 newspapers reporting on the current event of that time. And like any newspapers, you're going to get different perspectives.
So, if we agree that the 4 Gospels were actually written by men who were there at the time witnessing the events of Jesus' life with their own eyes, how do we know that their accounts haven't become embellished over the years or lost in translation? One way we can be sure that the Bible we read today is the same as the Bible from 2,000 years ago is the sheer volume of early manuscripts. Compared to only 7 existing manuscripts of Plato's writings, there are over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament. And our experts say that when the text of all these volumes are compared one to another, you find they are 99.5% consistent with each other.
The thrilling thing at the discovery at Qumran in the Dead Sea Scrolls was the fact that now there was an Isaiah scroll intact from about 200, 250 BC. Now we can compare how Hebrew scriptures were transcribed across 13.5 centuries. The thrilling fact is that it's 99.9% accuracy across all those years.
But how is it possible that these writings remain so close to the source over the years?
Among the Jewish people in Jesus' day, they had a very strong regard for oral tradition or holy tradition. It was not uncommon for a rabbi to have disciples that would study under the rabbi, and those disciples were committed to memorizing the rabbi's teachings word for word, so that when the rabbi passed away, they would disseminate his teachings without changing it and without altering it, and they would fix it and make it reliable.
We find then in the 4 Gospels, as they were written, they were first orally passed on for 30 years that established the detail. And then copyists in the ancient world are very different than today. We might just sit down and try to copy something and lots of error can enter in. But in the ancient world, these were valuable documents and these were trained specialists to make sure that when they made copies, they were historically accurate.
After recopying 2 pages, if you made one mistake on 2 pages, you begin from the beginning and start all over.
Okay, so the Bibles of today are just as trustworthy as their much earlier editions. But isn't it possible that the Bible is really just religious propaganda?
In religious propaganda, the tendency is to make the heroes spotless, bigger than life. But the scripture has the opposite effect. We see what I call the good and the bad and the ugly. All the warts are revealed. And we see men and women coming to faith, almost in spite of themselves.
But are there any other ancient texts that corroborate the facts written in the Bible?
Jesus' name does show up in the form of Christ in very interesting secular sources outside of the New Testament.
Tacitus, a historian of first-century Rome, mentions Jesus. Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, and Thallus also wrote about Christian worship and persecution that matches the New Testament accounts. The Muslim Koran mentions Jesus. Even the Jewish Talmud concurs about the major events of Jesus' life.
We do have the accounts of, say, Josephus in the Jewish milieu, who writes later on, and we find these little snippets about the historical Jesus.
So the evidence is in, and the experts agree. The Holy Bible is a trustworthy document that accurately recorded the life of Jesus Christ, who was a real person, who really lived in the places and during the time that the Bible tells us he did. But just what was life like back in Jesus' day?
The real value in archaeology is that it gives you the context in which biblical characters live. For the last several years, a lot of excavations have been going on in northern Israel and southern Syria. in the area that's really the environment where Jesus grew up. For example, just a couple of miles from Nazareth, where Jesus lived as a child, there is the town of Sepphoris. It's been spectacularly excavated, wonderful things being found there. And this is a town that's close enough to Nazareth that we can think, well, whatever we find in Sepphoris is going to help us understand the environment in which Jesus lived.
Just a closer walk with thee. Grant it, Jesus, if you please. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus keeps me from all wrong.
I forgive you.
I'll be satisfied as long as I walk.
Blessed are the meek,
Me
for they
walk
shall inherit the earth.
close to thee. Through this world.
So, how did a simple village boy grow up to become a charismatic leader? We don't know a lot about Jesus' early life, as the four Gospels focus on his birth and later years. We do know, though, that even though Jesus didn't fit the mold of what the Jewish people were looking for in a Messiah, he did fulfill every single one of the messianic prophecies of the Old Testament.
The Jewish people were long expecting a messianic figure to come along, but the general impression was that this would be a political Messiah, somebody who would free them from the yoke of Roman governmental control.
And the interesting thing about Lord Jesus Christ in his fulfillment of the messianic prophecies is that it's not that he fulfills one or two prophecies here and there, but he consistently fits them over and over in quite an abundance.
The account in the Gospels of the many miracles Jesus performed also contribute to his divine status.
Jesus did perform miracles if you accept the gospel accounts. In fact, there are 26 recorded miracles.
You would think that if the stories of Jesus' miracles were untrue, his critics would have said something.
Whether you accept the fact that he performed miracles or not, even his opposition, his opposers, confirmed that he did something that seemed to be supernatural.
So even Jesus' most vocal detractors agreed that he performed these mysterious things.
Even today on the mission field, all around the world there are people. The blind are being made to see. Lame people are being made to walk. In the name of the risen Jesus, healing is taking place.
Patients who are terminally ill and there's no hope for them, bouncing back from the very jaws of death to perfect health. It happens.
Whether there is actual scientific proof of miracles and faith healings, you can't deny that many claim to have witnessed or experienced these things with their very own eyes.
There are, even as we speak, 2 billion Christians across the world, and there is no other teaching, faith, philosophy, government, political party, whatever, which commands the loyalty of 2,000 million people.
Is it crazy to believe the Bible and what it depicts as historical events? I suppose so in some sense, because it does seem unbelievable at times.
Perhaps the most unbelievable and most controversial part of the Bible is the account in the Gospels of the last 4 days of Jesus' life, known as the Passion. The tragic events of the final days of Jesus' life were really no surprise, as they were all outlined by the prophets in the Old Testament. The script was written by God himself. Still, it took the courage and the conviction of Jesus Christ to play out each and every heartbreaking scene, culminating in his ultimate sacrifice. And incidentally, it took virtually no persuasion to get the other key players to fill their villainous and treacherous roles. As Jesus' popularity grew, so did the suspicions of the Jewish high priests or Sanhedrin, and no one was more skeptical or felt more threatened than the high priest Caiaphas.
We know Caiaphas historically from several sources. Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, talks about Caiaphas and so on. So he's a character that we've known in that way for a long time.
In 1990, an amazing discovery was made quite by accident. While digging in Jerusalem's Peace Forest, archaeologists came across an ossuary. An ossuary was a little bone box used to permanently store the remains of a departed loved one.
In order to know whose bones you were dealing with, people would scratch the names on the end of the box as they put it into the shelf. To everyone's amazement, a box was found which talks about the family of Caiaphas.
Among the bones they found in the box were those of a 60-year-old man. The name and the date inscribed on the box remarkably matched the time and description of Caiaphas from the Gospels.
Put all that together and you think, we probably have the actual bones of the man who tried Jesus in the court.
Now, Caiaphas and the rest of the Sanhedrin wanted Jesus and his followers subdued. They were so concerned about the impact his ministry might have on their own control of the Jewish people that they secretly conspired to capture and kill Jesus.
This man must be stopped.
It is our duty.
He will undo everything. Jesus must die.
The council was unanimous that Jesus must be dealt with, but they couldn't find the opportune time to capture him in secret until Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' own 12 disciples, approached them with a tantalizing offer.
What will you give me to deliver him to you?
They agreed on 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment on, Judas waited patiently for the right moment to betray Jesus, his teacher and friend.
What I find fascinating about Judas, in fact, all the players in the Passion story, is that I believe each one is a parable, or if you like, a metaphor, or existentially a picture of each one of us. For I believe there is a Judas in each person that is capable of selling a friend.
On the first night of Passover, Jesus sat down with his 12 disciples for the Passover feast in what has become known as the Last Supper. It is at this fateful meal that Jesus revealed to his apostles the horrifying events to come over the next few days. A group of frightened and bewildered men listened as Jesus told them that, according to the Scriptures, he was to be betrayed and crucified. He said that one of them would betray him, and that the rest of them would deny knowing him in order to protect themselves. After the meal was finished, Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, taking his 3 favorite disciples with him, Peter, John, and James.
Sit here a while I go and pray. My heart is heavy. Wait with me.
Leaving the 3 behind, Jesus went on a little further into the garden and dropped to his knees to pray alone.
Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass away from me. But not as I will, but as thou wilt.
Jesus rose to speak to his followers, but found they had fallen asleep.
You could not watch with me 1 hour? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Feeling abandoned and forlorn, Jesus went away a second time and prayed.
Father, if this cup may not pass from me, thy will be done.
In some ways, I find the Garden of Gethsemane is a pivotal point. He really wrestled with his Father about the cup of judgment that he had to drink. But here it was, the hour was before him. The shadow of the cross is looming over Jesus, and there's no way for him to escape. And he had to make a choice, because God does create us with choice, and he chose to lay down his life.
Scholars agree that the only way Jesus could have survived the humiliation of the religious and secular trials and the brutal beatings he received at the hands of the Romans and the Jews was his own acceptance of the personal sacrifices he was sent to earth to make.
When we watch Jesus Christ going through the trials, you don't find a person who's upset or who's panicking or who is frightened, but very much one in control of his own destiny.
Again, Jesus went to his disciples and found them still asleep, distraught, distressed, and deserted. He returned to pray a third time, as he was in such agony. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus sweated blood.
There is a medical condition which causes very slight bleeding into the sweat glands. It's called hematidrosis, and it's brought upon by a lot of psychological stress. And under those circumstances, certain chemical conditions can cause the blood vessels to leak blood.
As Jesus rose from praying, Judas crept into the garden with 2 Roman soldiers dispatched from the Sanhedrin. Judas had prearranged with the soldiers that he would identify Jesus by kissing him. Judas defiantly walked over to Jesus and looked him in the eye.
Friend, why have you come?
Hail, Master.
Judas, must you betray me with a kiss?
Seize him!
The Roman guard descended upon Jesus and grabbed him forcefully, as if he was a common criminal. The guards took Jesus to Caiaphas' house for a clandestine late-night trial where the Sanhedrin conspired to bring false witnesses against him.
This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.
What have you to say about that?
But Jesus remained silent.
I command you by the living God to tell us whether or not you are the Christ, the Son of God, or not!
If I told you, you would not believe me.
He has blasphemed! We need no more witnesses. What do you all think?
The angry mob spat on Jesus and beat him. These were the same people who had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem just 4 days earlier. The Pharisees were pleased that their plan was working. The next stop was Pontius Pilate, the governor.
Pontius Pilate is an interesting character, and he's somebody we can get a good firm grasp on historically.
In 1961, Italian archaeologists unearthed a stone that was part of a 4th century staircase. But when they turned the stone over on the other side, they made an astonishing discovery. They found that the stone had been reused and was actually from the 1st century. It was originally part of a dedicatory inscription at a temple built for the Emperor Tiberius. The first word they made out was Tiberius. But what came next was very enlightening.
The next couple of lines it very clearly says, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea. It's a wonderful thing to be able to, hold in your hand something and think, hey, this is Pontius Pilate that I've always heard of.
In the early hours of the morning, the Pharisees took Jesus to see Pontius Pilate and laid out their trumped-up claims against him.
Are you the king of the Jews?
That's what you say.
Jewish king. Can you not hear what terrible things they say about you?
But Jesus remained silent.
I find this man has committed no crime.
But he stirs up the people all the way from Galilee to here.
So this man is a Galilean.
He's a stranger from Galilee.
Then you have come to the wrong place. Take him to Herod.
To Herod. Take him to Herod.
So Caiaphas and the soldiers took Jesus to Herod. This is not the same Herod from the Nativity story, but one of his many sons who was a much lesser monarch.
Now, Herod Antipas is well known in history too. And as somebody who's interested in coins, I'll have to tell you that there are many coins. They're relatively rare, but they are always found in Galilee, usually rather worn, but quite often they have very clearly written the name on there, Herod Antipas or Herod the Tetrarch. And they have the years they're minted on them. Some of them even minted in the same year as the trial of Jesus that we read about in the Bible.
As Herod was also in Jerusalem at the time, it was just a short journey to take Jesus to the king. Herod was thrilled to finally meet the man everyone had been talking about.
What do we have here?
It is Jesus of Nazareth. He calls himself King of the Jews.
So you are Jesus Christ. I have been dying to meet you. They say you are a miracle worker. Dazzle me.
But again, Jesus remained silent. Herod continued to provoke Jesus into saying something that would incriminate himself. But he never uttered a word. While Herod found Jesus' silence entertaining, it infuriated the high priest, Caiaphas.
This man is guilty of blasphemy and should be put to death. It is your duty.
Don't speak to me of duty, and do not suppose to know my mind. This man has nothing to say to me. Take him away. But nothing. Out, all of you.
So the Sanhedrin had no choice but to take Jesus back to Pilate, as their own religious laws prevented them from putting a man to death themselves. Needless to say, Pilate was not pleased to see Jesus again. He told the angry mob that he found no fault in Jesus, and since Herod also found him innocent of any crime worthy of death, that he would chastise him and release him. Pilate was anxious to keep the peace, and as he contemplated his next move, his wife came to him and urged him not to have anything to do with Jesus, as she'd been having ominous dreams about him. It was customary for Pilate to release one prisoner each year in honor of the Jewish Passover.
And you would have me release this murderer over this man who has committed no crime? And what would you have me do with this Jesus of Nazareth?
When Pilate saw that he could not persuade the crowd, he took a basin of water and washed his hands of the ugly mess to save his own political career.
I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it.
Let his blood be on us and on our children.
So Jesus was sent off to be beaten or scourged, which was the Roman routine before crucifixion. Roman scourging was carried out by a lethal cat-o'-nine-tails whip made up of many leather thongs with shards of shattered bones with razor-sharp edges and steel balls tied to them.
The steel balls would cause deep bruising in the flesh, and the bone would cut the flesh, so we'd get a combination of bruising and lacerations.
Roman law called for a maximum of 39 lashes, but often the guards would get so worked up, pounding away, that some victims died before they even made it to the cross.
First of all, the deep bruising and pounding on the rib cage will cause bruising in the lung, which can lead to pleural effusion. The other more important and immediate thing that happens with the scourging, with the lacerations, basically the flesh gets shredded by the whip. As a result, there's profuse bleeding.
An average healthy adult man of around 180 pounds has 10 to 12 pints of blood in him. The amount of blood loss Jesus suffered during the scourging would have been between 3 and 5 pints.
So that would cause him to have a drop in his blood pressure, which would mean that when he would be standing up, he would tend to pass out. That's called hypotension due to blood loss. It's also called hypovolemic shock or cardiovascular shock. Also, the kidneys would stop putting out urine, would be recovering all the kidneys could to maintain the blood volume. And so it would have the immediate sensation of thirst. So this also explains why he said when he was on the cross, "I thirst."
After they had stripped and beaten him, the soldiers placed a crown of thorns upon Jesus' head to mock him.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Then they led him up the hill to Calvary, pushing and kicking him as he struggled to carry his own cross. This chilling execution site had the foreboding nickname of Golgotha, or Place of the Skull.
Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Well, were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble.
Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. God! My God! Why have you forsaken me? I am thirsty. It is done.
Truly, this man was the Son of God.
We've all seen Jesus' crucifixion dramatically depicted in paintings and acted out in passion plays and films. But what exactly does a crucifixion consist of? And how exactly does one die from it? If you can bear the startling and the gruesome details, I think you'll find what our experts have to say very interesting.
Well, when he was taken to the crucifixion site, he would have been going to the crucifixion just carrying the horizontal beam, not the full cross.
Once Jesus reached the top of the hill, he was thrown on the ground and his arms were stretched across the horizontal beam for nailing to the cross.
Now, the nailing is significant because the Romans had spent many years perfecting this method of crucifixion and execution to greatly increase the amount of pain and suffering, as well as increase the amount of humiliation in the process. And so the nails would not gone into the palm of the hand as we normally see this. It would have gone in right here in the wrist. It couldn't go in here because there's only soft tissue between here and there, so that under the load of the weight of the body, the person would fall off the cross.
Not only was the wrist a good solid anchoring point, it was also a way of maximizing the pain, as a major nerve passes through the carpal tunnel in the wrist.
When you bang your elbow and you get this tremendous sort of electric shock pain, we refer to as the funny bone. And it's not a bone and it isn't funny, it's extremely painful when you hit it. So you can imagine when this nail goes through and it crushes the median nerve, you can imagine how painful that would be. Having bumped your elbow on the corner of a table is nothing compared to getting a pair of pliers and crushing that ulnar nerve.
Every time, Jesus pushed up to relieve the weight of his body so that he could breathe. The nails would rotate on the raw end of the nerve, causing incredible pain.
It was so painful, the Romans invented a new word for it. They called it excruciating, which is out of the cross, ex crucio. And when we say we're having excruciating pain, it's nothing like the pain that was actually experienced in that crucifixion.
As the Roman centurions raised the cross into the air and fitted it into the hole in the ground, his entire weight would be pulling on those nails in his wrists.
What happens is, because they are horizontal, the amount of force that's required, basically the weight of his body is going downward towards the ground, but his arms are horizontal. And it immediately puts a load in his arms that is theoretically an infinite load of tons of load. And it would immediately cause dislocation of the shoulders and the elbows.
To ensure that he remained on the cross, and to make it even more difficult for him to push up and breathe, the Romans nailed Jesus' feet to the vertical beam of the cross as well.
Some years ago, I think it was in the late 60s, there was an accidental discovery of a tomb in Jerusalem.
Archaeologists made a startling discovery when they found the ossuary or bone box of a man in his 20s named Johannan. Carbon dating of the bones proved Johannan lived and died at the same time as Jesus. When they began to take the bones out of the box to organize them, they found something very unusual.
When the bones were laid out, in the ankle bone of Johannan, there was an 8-inch nail had been driven through his ankle.
Finally, historians had actual physical evidence of first-century crucifixions.
I've seen that ankle bone, I've seen that nail. It's an amazing thing to see, and it's very, very helpful to us in going back and reading the story of the crucifixion and then seeing with a real human body and with a real nail how that took place.
Execution by crucifixion was originally invented by the Persians, but it was the Romans who perfected it, making it as painful and humiliating as possible, sometimes delaying death by several days for maximum torture. Now that we've confirmed that crucifixion was indeed a popular form of capital punishment in Jesus' time, let's further explore exactly why it is a particularly cruel and brutal way to put someone to death.
Now what is happening is that the full weight of the body is carried by the arms that are outstretched and dislocated. What that does is that causes the ribs to be in an inhaled position. So the problem is to exhale, to blow the air out. And the only way to do that is to take the load off the upper arms so that the diaphragm can come up and the rib cage collapse downwards as you exhale. And to do that, he has to push up on his feet. And the nails going through his heel bones, then he's putting all the load on his heels, nailed heels. And at that point, he can blow out a little bit of air.
The actual cause of death by crucifixion is slow, agonizing asphyxiation, accompanied by a number of other traumatic medical conditions.
But the most prominent one is the hypoventilation, the fact that he will be underventilating. And as the carbon dioxide is continually building up in his blood, the acidity of the blood increases. And as time goes on, that causes cardiac arrhythmia.
Skeptics believe that Jesus actually survived his crucifixion and that he faked his own death in order to fulfill the Old Testament prophecies. But now we know for certain that would have been impossible.
Well, people who would like to believe that it was all a hoax and that he faked his death don't have any knowledge about crucifixion and the Roman method of putting people to death. And given that we know that the Roman soldiers themselves would be paying with their lives if somebody escaped death, then it is absolutely impossible that he did not die. He did die, there's no question about it.
After confirming his death, Jesus' family was anxious to give him a proper burial before sundown and the start of the Sabbath. a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea, who, by the way, was a member of the Sanhedrin who prosecuted Jesus, but who was absent during their secret trial, asked Pontius Pilate for Jesus' body so that he might honor him with a Jewish burial.
And were you there when they sealed him in the tomb? Yeah, were you there when they sealed him in the tomb?
Joseph had recently contracted for his own tomb to be carved out of a large rock, and it is there that he laid Jesus to rest. Again, the Old Testament prophecy of the Messiah being buried in an unused tomb was fulfilled.
When they sealed him in the tomb.
A heavy wheel-shaped stone was rolled over the entrance to the tomb, and a Roman guard was placed on duty as the Sanhedrin were concerned that Jesus' disciples would steal his body and claim that he had risen from the dead.
In some ways, Jerusalem is a huge cemetery. People for centuries have been finding tombs in the Jerusalem necropolis. And what I'm about to describe has been found a number of times. A tomb that has been cut back into stone, into solid stone, into a cliffside or something.
What's amazing about these tombs is that most of them are sealed by rolling a big flat stone over the front of the tomb. Also, the entrances to these tombs are quite low, so that you really have to stoop down in order to get in. The reason this discovery is so amazing is that this fits perfectly with the description of Jesus' tomb in the Gospels.
And you suddenly realize we're talking about a tomb that is built exactly like the ones that we have found, because there are a number of them that are still there, still with the stone in place, so that you can see exactly how that story acted itself out in real life.
On Sunday, Mary, the mother of Christ, and Mary Magdalene brought spices and oils in hopes of anointing Jesus' body. But when they arrived at the tomb, they discovered that the rock had been rolled aside and the tomb was empty. They were startled by an angel. An angel who told them that Jesus of Nazareth had risen from the dead. He instructed them to alert Peter and the disciples that Jesus would meet up with them in Galilee.
The description of the empty tomb of Jesus in the Gospels is historically accurate. The Gospels tell us he was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. You wouldn't make up a name like that of a figure that everyone knew, because he sat on the Sanhedrin. It would be like me making up a name of a Major League Baseball player that didn't exist. Why, that would be exposed as a fraud immediately.
Even the Jews who condemned and disavowed Jesus acknowledged that his tomb was empty.
They explained it by saying that the disciples stole the body. So the friends and foes of Christianity all admitted that the tomb of Jesus was empty. The problem is the disciples would never have stolen the body because they were unable to do so. There was a guard at the tomb.
Not only was it impossible for Jesus' followers to steal his body, it's very unlikely that they would have even tried, because before they saw the risen Christ, they had all become non-believers themselves.
And they would not have given their lives for something they knew was a complete fraud. You will not have 12 men executed as martyrs for something they knew was nothing but a lie.
Having risen from the dead, Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene. Later, he appeared to two strangers who didn't recognize him. He walked along with them as they told him the fantastic story of this simple carpenter from Galilee who was wrongly crucified. Jesus finally appeared before his apostles, who were stunned and could not believe their own eyes.
Peace be unto you.
Master, can it be you?
Thomas, give me your finger and behold my hand. Now thrust your hand into my side.
My Lord, my God.
Thomas, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed.
The question about the resurrection is a question of evidence, and I think that there is strong evidence that the resurrection is a real fact of history. First, the time frame. From the death of Jesus in AD 33 until the time historians can date that there was a belief in the resurrection is at the outset 2 to 3 years. So we know that from the execution of a simple carpenter from Nazareth until the time that he was believed to be God himself, to be a miracle worker, and to have risen from the dead is only at the longest 2 to 3 years. That's a historical fact. Historians also know that in those days it took 2 generations for legend to replace historical fact. We're well within the time frame of 2 generations.
The second piece of evidence is that we know that believers and non-believers alike all accepted that Jesus' tomb was empty on what we now call Easter Sunday.
The third reason we know Jesus rose from the dead is the transformed lives of the disciples. You have to understand that these men ran the risk of leaving their religion and starting a new religion. And they lived hard lives of martyrs, and they eventually were executed for what they knew to be true. They didn't die for a false belief. They would have died for something they claimed they'd seen with their own eyes.
We know from 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that Paul tells us that Jesus Christ, the risen Lord, appeared to more than 500 eyewitnesses. That's quite a few actual eyewitnesses to verify an actual historical event.
Jesus spent several days with his apostles before leaving them with his final instructions.
Go into every nation in the world and preach the gospel to everyone you meet. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. And remember, I am with you always.
Give me that whole time religion.
Even confronted with the hard evidence of Jesus' death and resurrection, there are still those who claim it was all a big hoax.
It is possible that his resurrection was a hoax. It's possible in the same way that it's possible that there was no person named George Washington, that it's possible that Napoleon was not a general that fought on behalf of France, in the same way that it's possible that we were all born 5 minutes ago with memories and the earth is only 5 minutes old. It's possible. But no one should believe what's possible. They should believe instead what's the most reasonable thing to believe. Consider a parallel case in a court of law. The jury finds that the overwhelming preponderance of the evidence is that this person did the murder. Is it possible they're wrong? It's always possible, but if the evidence is strong, it is very unlikely, and the right thing to believe is that the person's guilty. Similarly, the evidence for the resurrection is strong enough to where the most reasonable thing to believe is that he rose from the dead.
We've heard some pretty compelling arguments, and we've seen some pretty convincing evidence. Yet still, the struggle between science and religion continues. Are facts and faith mutually exclusive? Must they be in conflict with each other? Not necessarily. Let's hear what our experts have to say.
It was Jesus himself who said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind."
My scientific background has actually been a great reinforcement for my faith.
I have found science to be a tremendous aid to my faith, in spite of what many people think. Many of the recent scientific discoveries have provided incredible evidence that God exists.
I'm sometimes a bit amused by the continuing argument or sort of pseudo-argument, quote, between science and religion, unquote.
Both of those, the Bible and the science, bolster my understanding of reality so that I can live most effectively in this modern world.
There's certain things you can know from science, and there's certain things you can't.
So when a person says, I can't believe that, they're reflecting more how they have been conditioned by a particular worldview that says there is no supernatural. There's only the natural. It's if I can't verify with what I see, smell, taste, feel, and touch, then I guess it's empirically not true.
I don't think the day will ever come when science replaces religion, because the best scientists I know say we can answer lots of questions. Unfortunately, the questions that are the most pressing questions for human beings, we can't answer.
It seems that faith and science are both needed to fully appreciate the Bible's message.
Now, this faith thing is a very, very important human response to what is happening here. Faith is the supplement to proof to totally demonstrate reality.
Contrary to the Bible's detractors, recent scientific discoveries have actually provided more evidence to support the Bible's authenticity and accuracy than to discredit it.
And so these scientific discoveries, that the universe had a beginning, that there is information in living things, and that the universe is rigged ahead of time, provide evidence that there's a God for me, because a bang has to have a banger, rigged dice has to have a rigger, and information has to have an informer.
God hasn't told us everything. He's given us essential revelation, not exhaustive revelation. And because we're not told everything, we do need science to experimentally ferret out for us laws, principles, data, and facts to fill in. In that way, I find science and faith not in opposition to each other.
So, there you have it. The real experts agree. The greatest story ever told is proven to be true. But for over 2,000 years, Christians have believed that the real truth about Jesus Christ, His life, His love, and His legacy lies within their own hearts and is evident each and every day here and all around the world.
Amen. Put your hands together. Amen. Let's praise Him. Amen. 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 Let everybody say amen. Sing the song now. Amen. Sing the song now. Amen. 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 Yes. Amen. 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 Everybody say
am with you always.
Everywhere you go,